Have you ever seen these big grid lines when taking a photo? You might be wondering, what are they and what do they mean? Well, they are the idea of rule of thirds. Let's talk about it. Are you a beginner photographer and you wonder what the idea of the rule of thirds is? Basically, the rule of thirds, I'll read it to you exactly. The rule of thirds is a rule of thumb for composing visual images such as designs, films, paintings, and photographs. The guideline proposes that an image should be imagined as divided into equal parts by two equally spaced horizontal lines and two equally spaced vertical lines, and that important compositional elements be placed along these lines or their intersections. Here's the main idea. Aligning a subject with these points creates more tension, energy, and interest in the composition than simply just centering the subject. I taught this lesson last year for the first time in my photography class, and it was one of my favorite lessons. Why? Because at the most basic level, it's not a very hard concept, and just by implementing it, it can elevate your photos very quickly. Because naturally your eye can follow these grid lines and it flows. It's one of those natural things. As people, we can look at something and it feels off. If it's not on these lines, if it's slightly to the side, if I'm compositionally here in the middle, that tells you something. But if I go off to the side, which I film a lot, I leave a lot of space, and you might be wondering, why would I do that? A lot of the times it's to follow that rule of thirds so that I have space to talk through, but also leave space so that I can add images. I believe one of the best ways to figure out how this works is to look at examples. So if you look at this image right here, we have a person looking off into the distance. As you can see, we kind of follow those lines using the rule of thirds. Those rule of thirds, if you're looking carefully, like it said in the description, it follows those specific lines, and if it hits those intersections, those are points of interest. Those lines are where to follow, and those points are where those points of interest are. But for this image specifically, the photographer centered the person out, and they're looking off into the distance. The way they used the rule of thirds is that they used space going upwards to having distance, something that they're looking out to. There's many ways to use the rule of thirds, and in this image, they're using that rule of thirds to bring the attention to the person by putting them in the middle. They're using that line, that bottom line, to bring your attention there, but also they have space to look. And it's the same thing that if you look at this image, this next one, of the person running. This person doesn't have space to move to the left. This person is running, and you have a lot of empty space in the background. If you don't have that space, if you look at the next photo, running forward, it feels awkward. So when looking back at that first photo of the girl running, it's a natural feeling of closing it, shut off. You don't have anywhere else to go. Whereas if you look at that first photo of that person looking out into the distance, there's an expansiveness. There's something to look for and look towards. But if you have something blocking it off, like the side of your photo, it naturally will feel awkward and stiff. Once you've learned how to use these concepts, like the rule of thirds, you can also learn to break these rules. Sometimes you might want to leave a little bit of awkward space, and maybe the person is talking to a crowd and you want to portray the feeling that they are talking to no one. Maybe you feel like the story you're trying to tell is that they're not really connecting with people. Maybe you do put them to the side. Make it feel awkward. You're telling a story within the photo. So the story you're telling with the person running is that the person running to the side where there's no extra space is you're not running anywhere. The person on the right where they have a lot of space, you're running somewhere. Each of these different ways of using the rule of thirds is telling a different story. Connecting to the next image, we have this, I think, mountain lion, and it connects directly to where the eye is looking. And I think that's a perfect way to imagine, what does that intersection of the lines mean? It's that natural point where your eye is drawn. As a photographer, you are telling the person where to look in your photo. Using the rule of thirds is just one way to do that. Naturally, your eye is drawn to these intersecting points, and maybe that's exactly where you want it. And in this mountain lion's image, that's exactly where they want you to look, because that's the exact point the mountain lion is. And you can see how there's many different ways to use this. You can use the more centered rule of thirds by just putting the person in the middle, like in this image. If you have this center point, it draws you into that middle section. I love this image of the people kissing because it uses the middle while also using that top left intersection point. I think it's a really well composed photo because it uses the space really well. Because you can go back to that photo where you have just the person in the middle. You're not focusing on the person as much as you are focusing on everything. And I think that's the idea of also using the rule of thirds. Like I was saying before, you're telling the viewer where to look. So for the kissing one, it naturally leads you to that top left corner and it makes you look at the people first instead of where you have the person in the middle draws your eye to them, and then you can see that there's so much more to the image, so it then draws your eye to continue around it. And then I love this last photo with the girl looking off to the right. This is a great way to imagine the rule of thirds. You're directing the viewer to where you want them to look. So if you put them in the left corner and she's looking off to the right, you were telling the person, I want you to naturally look that way as well. Sometimes you would put something off to the right section for her to be looking at, or you're trying to portray that she's looking off into the distance and maybe she's thinking about something. You were telling a story. Your photos should be telling a story in the space that you have. Your photos should be naturally telling a story. One way to do that is through your composition, which will be in a future video. But in this video, we're talking about rule of thirds. And this is just one way to compose your photo. Again, like I said before, I want to make it clear. All of these rules, such as the rule of thirds, are really important to learn. But once you've learned them, you can also learn how to break these rules. Use these tools to your advantage, but also learn how to use them creatively. Don't just put someone in the corner for no reason. Make it have a purpose. So if you put them in the corner, maybe you want them to feel awkward. Maybe you want the person to have no space to the left of them while they're running because they feel like they're going nowhere. Use these tools to your advantage and have them elevate your work and not just put them in there for no reason. So hopefully that helps. I hope you guys got something out of this video. Remember, make sure to subscribe to my channel. If you want to see more of the Photography 101 series, make sure you click that playlist up in the corner, and I'll see you later. Peace.